The grand amphitheater of the Obsidian Reach was designed to induce absolute psychological terror, its towering basalt tiers swallowing every stray echo until the air felt heavy, dense, and suffocating. High above the polished granite arena floor, suspended within an imperial gallery of interwoven starlight and dark iron, sat Lady Vespera of the Astral Concordat. She was a being of ethereal, terrifying beauty, her skin shimmering like powdered moonstone, and her sweeping, iridescent horns pulsing with the soft, hypnotic violet light of a dying star. For 3 solar cycles, she had stood as the undisputed champion of the Outer Rings, an immortal warlord whose psychic blade had shattered the will of 1,000 planetary champions without her ever breaking a sweat. Down below, the enslaved multitudes of the conquered fringe worlds sat chained to the lower benches, their multi-lensed eyes fixed in grim resignation upon the central pit. They had seen this ritual a dozen times before. Vespera would issue her customary mocking challenge, a cruel invitation wrapped in aristocratic disdain, and some desperate rebel or foolish mercenary would step into the dust, only to have their mind unraveled and their physical form reduced to floating ash within a matter of heartbeats. The arena was a slaughterhouse disguised as a courtroom, and Vespera was its unchallenged executioner. Slowly, effortlessly, the high-born warlord drifted down from her gallery, her feet hovering an inch above the blood-stained stone as she descended into the center of the ring. A wave of suffocating psychic pressure rolled outward from her frame, causing the massive iron gates at the perimeter to vibrate in unison. She raised her left hand, letting her long, obsidian-tipped claws click together in a sharp, rhythmic cadence that cut through the silent gloom of the stadium. Her voice, amplified by the amphitheater's acoustic resonance chambers, washed over the crowd with a chilling, musical arrogance. "Look upon them," Vespera purred, her melodic tone dripping with profound contempt as she gestured toward the trembling ranks of captured combatants. Pathetic remnants of dying civilizations, clinging to the pathetic illusion that your species possesses even a fraction of the cosmic destiny commanded by the Concordat. You send your strongest warriors, your decorated generals, your augmented champions, and yet none of you can endure even a single breath of my presence. She swept her glowing gaze across the terrified faces of the crowd, a cruel, predatory smile parting her lips to reveal rows of pearl-white teeth. "So let us alleviate the tedium of this afternoon," Vespera mocked, tossing her head back as her violet horns flared with blinding intensity. "Defeat me, human, and I'll be yours. Every ship in my armada, every star system under my governance, and my very sword shall belong to the first creature among you who can withstand my blade and stand victorious in this dust. Step forward, if any of you possess the spine." A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the amphitheater. The enslaved warriors stared down at their own scarred boots, their chests heaving with suppressed rage and helpless despair. They knew the rules of the Concordat's blood games. Vespera's psychic field was tuned to fry the neural synapses of any carbon-based lifeform within 3 seconds. Physical strength meant nothing when your own nervous system was weaponized against you. To step into that ring was not an act of bravery. It was simply a slow, humiliating suicide. Then, from the very back row of the outer labor tiers, a heavy, rhythmic sound broke the silence. Clank, scrape, clank. It wasn't the martial stomp of an armored legionnaire or the frantic scuffle of a desperate rebel. It was the tired, unhurried tread of a man wearing heavy rubber-soled work boots, walking with the slow, deliberate pace of someone whose lunch break had been violently interrupted by bureaucratic nonsense. A murmur of absolute confusion rippled through the gathered thousands. Heads turned, and the alien guards posted along the upper tiers snapped their multi-lensed optical sensors toward the disturbance. Stepping out from the shadows of the tunnel came Master Chief Industrial Logistics Supervisor Arthur Miller. He didn't wear powered battle exoskeletons, ceremonial chest plates, or energy weave cloaks. He wore a faded, oil-stained canvas jumpsuit with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing thick, rope-like muscles crisscrossed with grease stains and minor thermal burns. On his head sat a battered, sweat-stained gray baseball cap pulled low over his brow, shadowing a pair of tired, bloodshot brown eyes that looked like they hadn't seen 8 consecutive hours of sleep since the previous solar cycle. In his right hand, He dragged a 22-inch heavy-duty steel pipe wrench, its rusted jaws caked in dried hydraulic fluid. Arthur didn't look up at the towering Imperial Gallery. He didn't strike a heroic pose, and he certainly didn't shout a defiant war cry. Instead, he stopped halfway down the stone ramp, reached up with his left hand to scratch an itchy spot behind his left ear, and let out a long, wheezing sigh that sounded less like a legendary champion and more like a man standing in an endless queue at a municipal tax office on a Monday morning. "Unbelievable," Arthur muttered, his voice raspy, dry, and flat, carrying effortlessly across the dead silence of the arena. "I spend 40 hours a week down in Subbasement 12 trying to patch the primary sewage recycling manifold because some high and mighty aristocrat decided to dump a ton of unrefined hypermatter down the drains. And now I gotta walk all the way up 3,000 levels just because somebody's making a racket in the courtyard." Lady Vespera froze mid-stride. Her glowing violet horns flickered once, twice, in sheer, unadulterated bewilderment. She turned her ethereal head slowly toward the scruffy human trudging into her arena, her multi-lensed optical arrays scanning his unaugmented, unprotected biological form with absolute, paralyzing disbelief. What is this?" Vespera whispered, her melodic voice dropping an octave as genuine irritation replaced her theatrical arrogance. "Are you a lost laborer, creature? Where is your armor? Where are your weapons? You stand before the sovereign warlord of the Concordat wearing the refuse of a sanitation trench." Arthur stopped at the edge of the arena floor, leaning his heavy steel pipe wrench against his shoulder like a broom handle. He squinted through the blinding glare of the stadium floodlights, blinking slowly at the floating, immortal warlord as if she were a particularly annoying flickering fluorescent bulb in the breakroom ceiling. "Look, lady," Arthur said, his tone dripping with profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. "I don't know who scheduled this little performance review, but my shift ended 10 minutes ago, and the mess hall closes at 6. If you're going to challenge someone, could you take it outside the perimeter fence? Some of us actually have early shifts tomorrow." A collective gasp echoed through the thousands of enslaved spectators. Never in the history of the Concordat had anyone spoken to a high warlord with such absolute, bone-deep disrespect. Vespera's moonstone skin flushed a deep, incandescent crimson of pure, incandescent rage. Her ethereal beauty distorted for a microsecond as her psychic dampening field surged outward with the force of a tidal wave, designed to instantly liquefy the human's internal organs and reduce his consciousness to a weeping puddle of biological wreckage. "Insolent, herrlich specht," Vespera shrieked, her voice echoing like thunder across the basalt walls as she whipped her hand forward, unleashing a concentrated beam of pure psychic annihilation directly toward Arthur's chest. In screaming agony. The psychic blast crossed the distance between them in less than a millisecond, striking Arthur square in the sternum with an impact that should have vaporized a battlecruiser's hull. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't fly backward, he didn't collapse, and he didn't scream. He simply blinked, shifted his weight to his left foot, and reached up to casually brush a speck of dust off the shoulder of his oil-stained jumpsuit. The psychic wave hit his chest, rippled harmlessly across the lead-lined asbestos thermal vest he wore beneath his work clothes, leftover insulation from repairing the reactor core on sublevel 9, and completely fizzled out against the dense, stubborn aura of a man who simply refused to care about mystical energy attacks after working a 16-hour double shift. Vespera's eyes dilated in absolute horror. Her psychic field, the unstoppable weapon that had brought entire solar systems to their knees, had just broken against a human wearing industrial work clothes like a wave crashing against a concrete breakwater. "What?" Vespera choked out, taking an involuntary step backward, her floating stance faltering as her concentration shattered. "How is your neural matrix unsevered? That energy beam can crack planetary crusts." "Yeah, well, you clearly haven't dealt with the high-voltage transformers in Sector 4, Arthur sighed, rolling his shoulders until a loud, echoing pop rattled off the stone floor. He took 2 slow, heavy steps forward, lifting his steel pipe wrench off his shoulder and gripping it firmly in his calloused right hand. Those things hum at 400 gigahertz and leak radiation all day long. Compared to that, Your little parlor trick feels like someone shining a flashlight in my face while I'm trying to sleep. Before Vespera could summon another wave of energy, Arthur closed the distance between them with the sudden, terrifying efficiency of a man who spent his life wrestling heavy industrial machinery into submission. He didn't use martial arts or elaborate alien combat forms. He simply executed a textbook, ungraceful, two-handed overhead swing with his heavy iron pipe wrench. Clang. The rusted steel jaws struck Vespera directly across her high-tech ceremonial headpiece with the bone-shattering force of a falling freight elevator. A blinding shower of white electrical sparks and shattered microcircuitry erupted from her crown. The immortal warlord's eyes rolled backward, her legs buckled instantly beneath her, and the terror of the outer rings dropped like a felled timber, crashing face first into the dusty arena floor with a dull, humiliating thud. The entire amphitheater plunged into a dead, absolute vacuum of sound. 300,000 enslaved aliens sat frozen in their seats, their multi-lensed eyes wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and liberating disbelief. Arthur stood over the unconscious warlord, letting out a long, weary breath that ruffled his graying bangs. He looked down at her fallen form, shook his head in deep disappointment, and scratched the back of his neck. Unbelievable, Arthur muttered to himself, turning around and hefting his wrench back onto his shoulder. Always leaving her mess for someone else to clean up. He started trudging back toward the tunnel entrance, ignoring the stunned silence of the stadium behind him, completely unaware that he had just inadvertently become the owner of an entire interstellar armada, and deeply annoyed that he was going to miss his favorite television broadcast because of it.